Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is Sandeep Rambatla. I head the enterprise learning function at Imarticus Game Studio. I'm really glad that you're here as a part of this webinar. I would be happy to walk you through my thoughts on is game-based employee onboarding the right for your organization. We would love to have this particular webinar more interactive. I would be stopping at various points in time to check your understanding and your thoughts and views. And, the more we make it interactive, the more easy it's going to be on all of us to understand, such a heavy topic. So even before we get started, let me just briefly walk you through a little bit about myself. I have over 17 plus years of work experience working largely in various corporates, such as HSBC, Citibank in the process consulting and re-engineering space. Today, I head the enterprise learning division at Imarticus Game Studio. My primary function is to make learning more immersive and fun, specifically looking at cutting edge, research topics and, how do we really go ahead and then incorporate, an aspect of immersive learning experience. So that's what we do at Imarticus Game Studio. I'm also an avid researcher. I have over 5 publications in international journals, and I have been in the re-engineering, business process re-engineering space for over 13 plus years right now. With that, a little brief introduction about myself, a little overview about what we do at Imarticus Game Studio. Imarticus Game Studio is one of the preeminent, game studios, specifically focusing around serious games. When we mean serious games, we, typically are looking at 3 or 4 different aspects or important aspects. One, we are looking at, cutting edge research. We are looking at pedagogical approaches. We are looking at business process and more importantly, games, per se. So combining all of these, together along with an element of analytics, gives us the ability to provide immersive learning experience to our learners. So that's what we do at Imarticus Game Studio. We have, over 8, products that we offer to various clients, across different business verticals. What are we going to do the next 1 hour? I'm going to keep it a little simple and easy. We're going to address the question on is game-based onboarding the right for your organization? And when I mean your organization, each of you would have, different, business problems and challenges. And what we're going to do is to talk about some of these challenges, that we have from a cognitive science perspective. We would, touch upon, this entire buzzword called gamification and games as to when would you, be using each of these and what's the right thing for your organization. I would spend the latter half of this particular webinar, specifically focusing on giving you a demo of one of our onboarding programs, which would give you a fair idea as to how we could use games as a vehicle from an onboarding sense. And finally, I'm going to leave the floor open for discussion, and we're going to have this back and forth discussion at various points in time. So that's how, I've planned this 1 hour. And would be happy to take any questions. Please feel free to raise your hands. I have my colleagues, here who is going to be constantly monitoring the chat and who's going to stop me at various points in time, to interject to ask any questions that you might have. So let's now look at, the overall challenge that we as an industry, face today. The training and the learning industry today faces 3 broad challenges. One at the organizational level, second specifically at the learner level, and more importantly, the training tools and methods that we use. So there are these 3 layers of challenges, and none of this is quite unique to you. And I'm not going to tell you something that you haven't heard before. But what I'm going to do is to set the context to this particular webinar by acknowledging some of these problems that exist today and see how the vehicles that we are trying to use in terms of games are going to prove effective in each of these problems that we have identified. With evolving business models, today and with rapidly changing market conditions, the organizations go through immense, transformation in a shorter period of time. And having successfully, if I could say, come out of the pandemic, most of our organization, today face, immense challenge, both from the business model perspective and as well as the scale perspective, right? And with the evolving technological, changes and pressure on budgets, there is always a unique, search for how do we solve some of the problems in a much more scalable fashion and in a fashion which really benefits your organization. Secondly, when we are looking the entire challenge from the learner perspective, the primordial challenge that we have is, the fact of engagement. Today, a lot of research studies talk about how employees don't really feel engaged with existing methods, that are available out there. And this engagement, the lack of engagement thereof, is impacting their overall productivity as well. Again, engagements have a direct function in terms of adoption, where if I'm not engaged as a learner, then me adopting to a particular training program is also going to be low. And it is completely complicating things when we add the dimension of a multi-generational workforce, into this entire thing. So we have a workforce who are digital natives, to somebody who is in their 45s and 50s. And how do we really look at a training program which could really meet the needs and the wants of this multi-generational workforce? The third important dimension that we care to look at are the problems and challenges that we have with different training methods. The fundamental challenge that our industry is facing today is to really prove that there is an evidence of learning that is happening. So how do we really know that learning is happening? How do we know that training programs are not something that people or employees take easily, and they really have an interest towards learning? So the evidence of learning and the return on investment for any training programs is something that constantly HR leaders have been challenged upon. And that's something that we are also going to be looking at today as to how some of these solutions on onboarding could really solve these issues. So having said that, what's our approach today? The training toolkit is kind of filled with options that we have. We could really pack ourselves with multiple training programs and give our learners a wide, broad spectrum of intervention. But unfortunately, those interventions are like what I call the kitchen sink approach. It's like throwing all of those approaches, back at the learner, and then trying to, see and pray if one of those is going to really, prove impactful, right? So the challenge has been acknowledged. I'm sure you would acknowledge that particular challenge. And at the same time, our entire approach, towards learning and training has also been what I call the kitchen sink approach, where we throw so many interventions, to see which one of those really work and which, is proving, impactful. I'm going to take, a pause here. I want to check with you in your organizations today. What are some of these things that, you face? I mean, do you acknowledge, the fact that you are having some of these challenges? And I would love to hear if there's anything new that you do today in your organization, which, could be an interesting facet, for the rest of the audience. Anybody, if there's something that you would like to share, would be happy, to understand, and then, we could discuss that. I'm just going to wait, for a couple of seconds to know if any of you have any thoughts, or what I could do is to probably have some of these discussions towards the end, if that's what, you would prefer. Just waiting for a couple of seconds. All right, I have something on chat. So I think, yeah, looking at things towards the end works. So I've had, my colleagues, tell me that we could, and a few of you tell me that, you could look at, questions towards the end, and that's something that we would pocket towards the end. So if that's, the problem that we are facing as an industry, and we are looking at some of these challenges and the kitchen sink approach, to complicate, matters, there are, few more, terminologies that are available in the market. I'm sure, the buzzword of gamification is not, new to you. I've been constantly asked by, various HR professionals and industry leaders as to what's really the difference between gamification and epistemic. Games are serious games, as we call it, right? So if you can imagine a car, and, one of those, critical aspects of the car, let's say, I'm looking at the engine assembly, the engine assembly now becomes, gamification. If I just remove only the engine assembly, I'm looking at a small aspect of a game, and I'm implementing that in a non-gaming context, right? So if I implement a games to, let's say, a sales process, if I'm going to implement a game to operations process to increase motivation and engagement levels for people to actually perform better in what they do, that activity is called gamification, right? And today, the common gamification factors, that's been borrowed from games are what we call as points, badges, and leaderboards, PBL, right? So what I do is to remove the three key aspects of games of points, badges, and leaderboard, and I create a story and I put in an avatar, and then I put that in an environment in a non-gaming context. So it could be, gamifying your HRMS, it could be gamifying your operations process, it could be gamifying your sales process. So all of this, to look at gamification elements in a non-gaming context. So that's what it is. But games are, in total, what we call the entire car, right? So the games have a much larger play. It talks about suspense, it has a story, it has a protagonist, it has challenge, it has many more interesting facets, that's not pretty much available in the gamification realm. So gamification, as you would understand, is just a small fraction of the whole. And what we intend to do is to really look at the whole and not alone the fraction. So you would be, but what the problem in the industry is that we have been constantly using these terms interchangeably. And, when I hear people saying, what, I have gamification implemented or I have games implemented, but they're pretty much talking about gamification, right? So you would need to now discern between what gamification is and what games are, so that you clearly understand the difference between, both of this. But now that you have understood what the landscape is, and my, first, question to you is game-based onboarding or gamified onboarding, something relevant, and is it going to impact your organization? So to answer that particular question, now let's look at our onboarding challenge that we have. I'm sure, some of you from the industry would really acknowledge the fact that, we have three large problems in the onboarding space, starting from the pre-boarding phase where you have a huge renege of people who are accepting offers and not joining the organization, or it could be infant mortality where people who join the organization try and leave the organization within 3 months. So what is really happening during this particular tenure? So when we go ahead and then reflect and look at multiple research that, a passive and an unstructured onboarding, really increases the possibility of attrition. So when I mean increases the possibility, I'm not saying that's the only contributing factor. That is a catalyst, along with any other problems or challenges that the employee would have. Unstructured and a passive onboarding is going to soon act like a catalyst and give a very wrong first impression to your new joinee, and hence they might decide to keep updating their CVs and put it on the job portals, right? So that's one of the problems that we are looking at. How do we really engage meaningfully with our new joiners, and how do we really talk to a digital native who are well versed and who have experiences far beyond the traditional PPTs and PDFs that get thrown at them during the first day of induction. The second problem that the industry leaders have been talking about and looking at is the time it takes for any new employee to become productive. In a time and in a space where the time has shrunk and space has expanded, we would really want people to get productive as early as possible, right? So the average onboarding time today is anywhere between 4 to 6 months, depending upon the industry that we come from. But the overall, I would say the fact that managers today really want employees to become productive as early as possible. So that's one of the challenges that we'll be looking at. And the third important challenge is passive learning. So gone are the methods where we really looking at aspects of providing information in the form of disseminating them. And the entire idea of dissemination of information leads to knowledge creation is something that's been proven wrong. So this entire passive learning of just dumping information to an individual and hoping that they understand that within the first couple of weeks when they're getting onboarded is also one of the huge challenges that industry leaders have spoken about. So with this, to sum up, we've been looking at three large problems. How do I have a better induction program to improve their overall productivity and reduce attrition? How do I integrate, my employees, beyond the traditional e-learning programs, videos, and PDFs, which, sometimes are not quite effective, from an onboarding sense? And how do I engage them, in a skillful manner to really have an impactful, learning experience? So these are the three important, needs that we've been looking at. And research today tells us that, whenever some of these things are not handled properly, the impact of that, could be quite disastrous. So for example, the pre-boarding churn could be as high as 35% in organizations which don't really onboard, employees properly. And the fact that during my induction, whatever I learned, from the onboarding induction, only 82%, of them can't even retain, the knowledge. So if you're talking about your values, if you're talking about your HR policies, people don't retain them in the classical method of onboarding that happens today. And the fact that almost 23% of employees really think of updating their CVs and then leaving the organization within the first 3 months is also detrimental to the entire, space. I'm sure some of you in your organizations would either be facing some of these problems or have had solutions to solve, some of this interestingly. So what I'm going to do is to, like what you had suggested, going to park some of these questions towards the end to understand how do you really handle them in your organization today, and is there anything that you have done, which we could really, look at, improving upon. Apart from the fact that, what I'm going to talk to you is about the game-based, onboarding space. I'm going to take a quick pause to again check if there's any questions. I have something on the chat, so let me just quickly check. Yeah, so I do have people who are acknowledging, that, some of these problems and challenges that I've mentioned, are, things that they face within their organization as well. So thanks, Ved, for that. So now, the whole aspect, of is game-based onboarding, something that's, relevant for you. So let's ask this particular question. Let's look at what's happening around us. Let's understand this question, by looking at changes around us. Let's start from the academic world, right? Today, most leading universities across the world, be it Harvard, be it MIT, be it Wharton, are moving towards game labs. Each of these universities have specific game labs which would provide their students a virtual world to implement and try out everything that they've learned in a virtual, setup. So this gives, students a mode for discovery. Humans have always been individuals who have loved play. And I'm not sure if there's anybody in this particular audience who could say that, even in your childhood, you have not really enjoyed playing. So playing is the natural aspect of any human to actually express, the desire to discover, understand things, to experience things, and more importantly, reason and reflect on what is happening around them, right? So the entire growth, if you look at various psychological, tenets of how, researchers have looked at it, the growth in a human being comes from the fact that one is able to reason and reflect. And that ability to reason and reflect comes when somebody is provided with an experience where they could go ahead and then, try things out. By just merely communicating things to them by information dissemination, you are not going to psychologically impact the schema, or the training block or the memory block in the heads, of the individual, right? So that I'm sure every one of you here in this particular group have had interesting experiences in your life. And each of these experiences have taught you something extremely memorable because you have paused to reason and reflect on things. And that's exactly what, people have moved to. So you had the phase of MOOCs, the massively online, courses, drive that happened a couple of years back. Researchers have looked at what's the adoption rate for unpaid MOOCs, where whenever I join, into a MOOC program, what's the overall completion rates? It's hardly about 7 to 8%. So investing on a MOOC program, you don't really get that kind of a return because there is not much of an engagement, that happens within that particular space. Similarly, research also talks about, issues and challenges about the various other pedagogical approach. Fundamentally, the fact that we are looking at more of a passive learning than an active learning, pedagogical approach. So games, today have been quite prominent in the academic space, where you have had top universities across the world move towards game labs. So you could have an MIT game lab, you could have Harvard game lab. From the traditional methods, now even top universities have been looking at game labs. Apart from that, you have had interesting international bodies, both the UN Charter and the World Bank have been looking at specific measures which they want to measure. Apart from the SGD goals, we are also looking at assurance of learning. How do we really know that learning is happening? And there is a lot of research in this particular space to understand how learning happens. And games have been proven to be one of those vehicles where learning could happen much easier, because engagement levels and motivation levels are high. Naturally, when somebody is engaged and motivated, they would go ahead and then spend a lot more time than the traditional methods of learning. So hence, games have been proven to have a unique place in the learning space, and you've had more and more corporates, more and more organizations, and more leaders move towards that. And that's why gamification being the first adoption in various corporates. You have had people like Nike, you have had various organizations who have really looked at implementing gamification within their organization. So with that as a context, let's try and understand, is gamification or game-based onboarding the right thing for you? So if in the entire onboarding paradigm, which ranges from, let's say, a pre-boarding time where you are issued offer letters to organize to your employees, you would want your employees to discover, and when I as an individual, I'm sitting with 3 offers from different companies, and all 3 companies have been really good in terms of repute, then how do I make a choice? I mean, and most of the times people make a choice when it comes to the pay package. But apart from pay package, there are other softer aspects that one could really look at to see, can I really see myself ingrained in the culture and the values of the organization? And do I see a career with this particular organization? So how do I really communicate that to my employee today who's sitting with 3 offers? And can I start engaging with them much early on, so that I capture the mind space of an employee who has accepted the offer with me? Second, the moment they have accepted the offer and then they have come into the organization, there could be a phase where you would need to help them get accustomed and acclimatized to your policies, your processes much early on, right? Any employee who's joining is I'm sure you would appreciate with this analogy, it's like a marriage, right? So it's more that the company needs to understand about the employee, and the employee needs to understand about the company. Today, in most induction programs, you go and sit there, and the HR really gives a lot of information in terms of more about the organization, but very little is understood about the employee who's making this particular journey, and how do I reduce the anxiety of the employee who's taken this big step in his career to actually begin a journey within your organization. So that 2 days of induction becomes extremely crucial, and we really wish that organizations spend a lot of time in having meaningful interaction rather than talking about very transactional elements of HR policies, IT policies, and compliance policies, which could be handled differently through other mechanisms, while your HR and HR leaders and your business leaders could engage with your employees in a much more meaningful fashion. And the final act of really integrating your employee also becomes extremely important. If you belong to an industry which has a huge churn, if you belong to an industry where you would need to constantly train your employees on various policy changes, be it regulatory policy changes if you're from the BFSI space, or if you would want to constantly update them on new and cutting edge knowledge, then you would need a constant integration program, right? So your entire 30 to 120 day program could actually go into the depths of your organization, talking about your processes, talking about your value chain, talking about your entire products. And all of this, could be quite interesting, where people could have a constant refresher and people could also have a mechanism to come back to it, on a regular basis. So these are elements. So if your organization is really focusing on each of these three pillars, and you're looking in for a solution to meaningfully engage with employees and have a much richer, conversation when you meet them, on your premise, I think a gamified onboarding solution is right for you. So if you have been grappling with any of these challenges, and if you've been looking at finding solutions for problems that pertain to each of these three pillars of onboarding, then I would definitely urge you to consider game-based onboarding, and we will look at how it could really play an integral part in your entire process. I actually see somebody raise their hands in terms of a Q&A. I'm just going to look at that. The organizations are focused on in-house content for learning and are skeptical about off-the-shelf games as it is not contextual. I think that's it's a great question. The moment you're talking about games, the fundamental thing that comes, to you is the fact that it is a standalone game and it is not contextual to your organization and it is off the shelf. I completely agree with you. If you have such a gaming paradigm, I think that's definitely not suited. We are not looking at something like a one size fit all or a one approach fit all method. That is that is something that's definitely not recommended. I completely acknowledge your concern that because the trainings are on site today and you are looking at content within the organization and you don't want to use games which are not really contextual. So I'm going to come back to that. If there is a mechanism where you could have the best of the both worlds, where you would be able to author the entire onboarding content, where you have the liberty and the opportunity to transform and publish a game which is contextual to your organization, and that's an approach that you could really look at. And that's something that we would be seeing as to what are all the tools that are available today, which could help you solve exactly the problem that you've mentioned. And I'm going to cover that in the next couple of minutes. So the other thing about onboarding is the fact that today, let's look at the pre-boarding stage, where it's more like a black box. If you don't have any digital engagement, the HR is in for surprises because they come to know that an employee is not joining only in the nth hour, that they wouldn't be joining. And hence, there is a lot of opportunity cost lost, for waiting for a particular candidate who has decided not to join you. So think of a mechanism where you do have a digital dashboard where you could look at a probability churn index, which gives you a probability based on engagement aspects, and where you're able to engage much early on. You could really look at aspects of if with a high likelihood of probability, if a particular person would join your organization or not. And that's, one aspect that you could, look at as well. So I'm going to come back to this, to specifically answer, questions, on onboarding space, like what you had mentioned. What we at Imarticus Game Studio do is also to build onboarding frameworks, and our onboarding frameworks come from a banking game lab. It could be a virtual office game lab. It could be a retail game lab. There are multiple game labs that we have created along with an authoring capability. What it means is this entire environment will have the look and feel of your office. So which means to say, if you belong to, let's say, an XYZ company, the entire environment will look like an XYZ company with your own logo, with your own standees and colors and branding guidelines. The entire content that you see here within this particular game would be your content. So you have the power of an authoring engine to author a game. So if you have been accustomed to e-learning and e-learning publishing and e-learning authoring, and if you've heard of tools like Adobe Articulate and Storyline, what we at Imarticus Game Studio do is to also build a similar such authoring engine, which has the capability for you to author games and author the content which are relevant to your specific organization. And hence what it allows is for a tremendous amount of flexibility for you to use these game parts for employee onboarding, product sales, and process onboarding as well. So let me just walk you through how that works. So, what you see here is a quick, overview of the banking game lab. So at the banking game lab, we completely simulate a banking environment. The posters, the standees, the color schemes that you see in this particular environment will resemble your, bank branch, and you would have a complete, visual look of how you are entering your particular bank branch. And any content that you see within this particular gaming environment would be your organization's content, because it is coming from the backend authoring engine. And similarly, we have a retail game lab. So if you belong to the retail industry, you could really look at a retail game lab where help people understand the various SKUs you have, understand your entire sales process in terms of how do you really, manage your, sales pipeline. Or it could be specific product training, which is far more immersive, where I could go ahead and then interact with fictitious customers. I could interact with fictitious operations people to understand how things in my retail space work. And we also have a virtual, online office environment, which again mimics your head office setup, where you could really look at customizing this particular space, to have the look and feel of your environment. And how does this work? So all of this is possible because we have created modular, spaces. When I mean modular spaces, what I mean is, the entire, program is custom built in such a fashion that there are individual modules. So we have onboarding templates, we have sales templates, process templates, a multi-language translator. So wherever you have, capability or the need to use, the platform into different languages. So we have had customers who are using a platform in Hindi and in other South Indian languages as well. So this particular game has multiple individual modules, which are templatized, and each of these templates would carry your own organizational content, and the environment would have a resemblance of your environment. So the experience that you give your employees would mimic your virtual setup rather than a standalone, setup that one of the questionnaire had actually asked. So typically what happens is, from a feature standpoint, you could go ahead and then interact, with various characters, and these characters could be leaders in your organization. These characters could be, peers, or it could be end customers as well. So you would have multiple, character profiles that you could create, and you could have interesting conversation. Think of a scenario, where you would want to explain an HR policy. And pretty much if I'm joining a new organization as an individual, I could have questions about, let's say, a relocation policy, or, for that matter, a paternity policy. So, and somebody is quite interested in a maternity policy. So what happens is you could have interesting conversations and branching conversations created, through this particular platform, where, content specific to a particular individual. And if they would want to know more, they could get into the details of it. And we would integrate this with your SharePoint drives or any other internal portal, that you would have for detailed information as well. So these virtual conversations could be quite interesting, where you could create multiple character profiles. And if a new employee is joining one of your bank branch or your office, which is distributed in place, they could now understand people at the head office. They could understand their overall work structure, org structure, and understand if they have a specific message for you, you would be able to relay that particular message, to your employee. So imagine this to be a mini metaverse for your organization, where you would have virtual characters who will resemble leaders and employees of your organization. And you could create, and more importantly, custom create the entire experience to have an immersive onboarding experience to your employees. Again, the platform has multiple assessments, which would understand your learning capability, your knowledge capability, and your skill capability. And each of these games are designed using what is called as an evidence-centered design approach. And ECD, evidence-centered design, is quite similar to our performance appraisal, mechanisms, right? So what it looks for is, evidences of skills and proficiencies of people, within your organization. Capture those evidences in the form of tasks in the game. And when a player, is encountering these tasks, it would automatically start profiling the player. So you would get interesting insights, about the player's predisposition, about their decision-making skills, about their overall outlook, by letting them play this particular game. And all of this is in the form of what we call as a stealth assessment, or it's extremely non-intrusive. You could also use such platforms to have what is called as day in the life of a particular role. So if I'm joining, let us say, a bank branch, or if I'm joining an insurance industry for that matter, and if I would want to understand, what is it to actually, what is it that I would need to do on a daily basis, I could have a complete, day in the life, simulation in the form of an inbox, which will give me tasks, which will give me challenges, so that I would understand what it is to actually work in that particular role, right? So some of these games, that we have used have been extensively used by various organizations. So we have had one of the largest reinsurance firm from Switzerland use this onboarding platform to help understand the business process. So the employees today who found it extremely hard to look at standard operating procedures and process maps, were given this particular opportunity to learn the end-to-end value chain through a game, and that was really proved successful, and then that increased the overall retention rate by 86%, from what it was before. And similarly, one of the largest financial conglomerate within India is today using this particular learning onboarding platform, to help their HR employees onboarded to HR processes, and test them on their understanding, when they are looking at things. So what I'm going to do right now is, again, spend the next couple of minutes to quickly, walk you through, the game to, help you visualize and understand, how things work. So you are seeing the entire demo from my, browser. So which means to say it's going to be fairly light, and you would be able to, play this particular game on your profile. So as an individual, I could go select my own avatar. And, once I select my own avatar, I'm transported, to a virtual, world. So like any good movie, the game also starts with an immersive storyline. This storyline is extremely important to set the context to the player as to why he or she has joined the organization and what they would need to do in this particular space. So a quick 5-minute introduction provides the entire context to the player as to why they are playing a particular game. Moment they go through that, now what they would happen is they could look at their old profile. They could understand their completion status, their progress status through this particular dashboard, and they could subsequently get into the game where they understand the various facets of your organization. So this game is built around multiple psychological nudges. So which means to say every day when I log in, I have a login reward which I could encash for company related merchandise. I could have a game store which could give me interesting goodies for me to really look at as well. So let me show you the various parts that I could take. So all of these are various chapters in the game, or various levels in the game, and you would be able to configure each of these levels through the authoring platform. So how does the authoring engine looks like? So here in the authoring engine, you could go ahead and then look at the overall profile status and progress status of your employees. You could look at detailed reports that would be available in the form of dashboards, and summary reports, which would give you a clear overview of your employees. And more importantly, go ahead and then configure the entire game through this particular platform. So you could configure your mission, look at various information as to how each of the missions are configured. You could go ahead and then input the content in this particular platform. So for example, we have a conversation template, we have a puzzle template. So if I want to go to the conversation template, I would be able to edit the entire conversation through an interesting map, which will tell me how the entire conversation will flow. So this could be conversation with your HR leaders, it could be conversation with your product heads, and it could really give you interesting conversations that you could do. And all of this happens through the game. So for example, the moment I go ahead and then launch my mission, let me just quickly launch the mission to show you how the game environment today looks like. So just give me a second. reshare my screen. I just take another question. So while I just, get back to the game, so just want to check if you have any questions, at this point in time. Would be happy to take any questions that you might, have. Any questions at this moment? Just give me a second where I'm just going to load, the game again. Sorry, I had some issues with my, network. Just come back. So I'm just going to log into the game again. So in this, gaming environment, you could now actually, as I said, customize the entire, game to have the look and feel of your office setup. So it could be, adding your own set of logos, and creating environments that completely, resemble your office, space. What you could also, do is to provide interesting, updates. If you would want to talk about the historic milestones of your organization, so you could look at a complete historic milestone, and you would have, your HR walkthrough, and then provide a complete overview. So in each of these interactions, you would be able to bring up a video, which, would give insights, to your players and have an interesting, conversation that could happen. And subsequently, what you would also be able to do is to add your own culture and your own values in the entire system. And you would also be able to look at multilingual support. So for example, you could see, hey, हमारी company का सिद्धांत है, right? So you could have multiple language interactions that could happen. And each of these interactions could be quite interesting, to see how, players would, understand more. And this is a virtual walkthrough, that an individual, would have. So in the individual walkthrough, you could have multiple interactions of conversations, you could have individual tasks, and you could, mimic a real world onboarding through a digital platform. And hence what would also happen is once they get onboarded onto your system, they're already fairly aware, of all the details about your organization, and you could have interesting conversations, with them. As I'd mentioned, you could also simulate the day in the work life of your employees, where they could have, specific, tasks that you would be in a position to provide it to them. So it could be a task that you could, give them, and they would be able to respond to these tasks. And each of these values are coming from the backend, engine, which captures each of this data and then provides a immersive experience to your employees. I'd also mentioned that you could create various character profiles. This environment is completely customizable, where you would be able to, give a complete walkthrough of your entire space, and you could add and customize the avatars, the look and feel of the avatars. You would be able to, handle the entire branding guideline of your organization, through this particular platform, and that too quite simply by using the authoring engine. A color change or adding a logo or adding a video is fairly simple, as much as adding it or uploading it in the backend engine. So one of the questioners or participant did ask me, how is it going to be if it's only going to be a straight product which might not be contextual. So this is how we make the entire experience contextual, where you would be able to contextualize and provide an experience that would resemble the fabric of your organization. And this kind of a setup has proved to be quite effective in a lot of organizations that we have worked for, and they have found that their onboarding attrition numbers in terms of the pre-boarding has come down to almost 12%. So earlier, if it is 30%, it's come down by 12%. And we have had instances where the engagement levels of people completing these games have gone much higher. So the primary intent is not to give you a complete dump on the product, but the facet that you could use such interesting aspects to gamify and then provide an experience which is far more immersive to your employees who are joining your organization. So would be happy to take any questions that you might have. I think there is an individual who asked me, could you tell us more about how training for new products could be done using games? That's an interesting question, Ved. So the way in which we could really do training of products is where you would be able to simulate a virtual marketplace through games, and this virtual marketplace could have multiple customer personas who would be interested and whose needs could be quite divergent and who would be interested in different products. So the entire aspect of training here is reliant on what we call as failure learning, which is of the premise that I would need to understand or uncover the need of various customers through understanding their profiles. And the moment I do that, I would need to scan my entire product inventory to do that. So what would happen is, though there is a possibility of trial and error, what the system would do is, because it also has a learning algorithm built in, it would direct the player to understand the right kind of product fit to the employees who are looking into solve customer problems. So interestingly, there are multiple product sims and conversational and sales sims that are available to help you onboard your employees for product related training. Any other questions that you might have? All right. So if there are no questions, thank you so much. To quickly summarize what is the overall import of this particular webinar, what we intended to do is to give you a high-level overview of what game-based learning could really do to your onboarding practice. Today, employees require an onboarding experience which is markedly different, from the way in which we have been onboarded to various corporates when we joined the entire workforce. The digital natives need an experience which is relatable. The digital natives need an experience that is far more immersive, because there are multiple options today, which really are available for them, and more importantly, that really demand their attention. So how do you really capture the attention? How do we keep them engaged? And how do we really give them an experience that is memorable? So that is the fundamental question that we wanted to address. And one such solution is to provide a game-based learning offering, which would help your new joiners discover your organization rather than just a passive learning. It would help them discover various facets of your organization, and it would also give them an experience that would be memorable, right? So there are many options out there, and you could really consider. And if there's anybody in this particular group who would love to know more about some of the products that we have which could solve the issues that we spoke about, we would be happy to connect. Do leave us a note on the chat, and we would be happy to connect with you. So thank you so much for spending your valuable 1 hour time. I'm happy to give you 4 minutes back on your calendar. Thank you so much, and good evening. Thank you.